guess that there are two kinds of strength. One would be called a gibber, a warrior, a soldier, who is not afraid to go into battle and to face danger. That's one kind of strength. And what that takes is to not fear death. If you're afraid of dying, then you can't go into war. So you either have to believe that you're not going to die, that somehow, like this guy back in the shtetl was bored. So he says to his mother, I have nothing to do, you know what, I'll join the army for a couple of months and I'll come back. So the mother says, I don't know if you can join for a couple of months and come back whenever you want. And besides, they're going to shoot at you. He says, they're going to shoot at me? What did I do? So either you think nobody's going to shoot at you because you're a good boy, or if you die, you die. But at least you're dying for the cause, right? That's the strength of a soldier. But in Eishes Chayil, there is nothing there that suggests heroics. The Eishes Chayil doesn't do anything heroic. In fact, some people complain, some feminists complain, that if this is the best a woman can be, it's not very impressive. The greatness that Shlomo HaMelech is describing is the strength to not be afraid of life. So there's the strength of not being afraid of death, and there's the strength of not being afraid of life. So what does it say in Eishes Chayil? She wakes up in the morning and she takes care of the family. She sews and she sells and she buys and she comes and she goes. What exactly does she do? And the answer is, whatever. Whatever it takes, she does. No, nothing heroic, but she doesn't miss anything. Whatever needs to be done, she does it. So I think one of the telling lines, Botach bo leiv bailo, her husband trusts her. She is so reliable and dependable because whatever has to happen, she can do it. Gamlas hutei v'loi ra, she is good to him and not bad to him. Kol yemei chayahu, the consistency and the endless possibilities without heroics. This is what is unusual and amazing about the Eishes Chayil. Most people have a limited menu, a limited repertoire. I can do this, and I can do that, but I'm not ready for that. I'm not good at that. The Eishes Chayil has no such limits. So where does that strength come from? It kind of makes sense that comes from not having any fear of life. And by Chassidim, fear of life is more important than fear of death. Because life is more important. So having a respect for life, what does it mean, not being afraid of life? Not being afraid of life means knowing the seriousness, knowing how important a minute of life is. It can be intimidating. I can't do that, I'm not up to that, and I'm going to fail. So not having a fear of life is not a simple thing, because life is frightening in its importance, in its holiness. In one of the famous Maimorim that the Rebbe said in the second year, Tafshin Yud Beis, the Rebbe was crying bitterly, and he was saying, there's Ava and there's Yira, but who has time for that? To love Hashem and to fear Hashem, who has time for that? Every minute there's a kavanah. The Eibishter expects something. So what love, what fear? The job has to get done. Every minute's purpose has to be fulfilled. That's pretty heavy.
But how is fulfilled?
But it's easy to be intimidated by that. So not being afraid of death is impressive, but not being afraid of life is even more impressive. Part of the greatness of Purim, according to Hasidus, is that year the Yidden had Mesiras Nefesh for an entire year. There's always that emphasis that they had the Mesiras Nefesh. They were in a Mesiras Nefesh mode for an entire year. Why is that so significant? What's so impressive about that? Usually we think about Mesiras Nefesh, refuse to bow to the idol and die. Which means no fear of death. But when you have Mesiras Nefesh for a whole year, it's a different kind of Mesiras Nefesh. Nobody's killing you. And it's not going to be over in a few minutes. It'll hurt for a minute and then it'll be done. It's not going to be done. So having Mesiras Nefesh a whole year is a completely different experience. It's not the same Mesiras Nefesh, but dragging on. So again, the Mesiras Nefesh of dying, which means no fear of death, that's when you dismiss yourself. I'm not important. I'm not significant. Yiddishkeit must survive, and if it cost me my life, well, it's worth it. So that's basically dismissing life and not being afraid of death. But when you have Mesiras Nefesh for a whole year, that doesn't come by dismissing yourself. It's the opposite. If you can have that attitude day after day, consistently, I think that's the key word here. The consistency means you're taking life seriously, not dismissing it and ready to die. And of course, that's like a very dramatic example. Living or dying, high drama. But it exists in small things also. Like, for example, you overlook your husband's bad habit because, life isn't going to get any better, you might as well live with it. That's like not being afraid of death. That's like saying, look, it's not going to get any better, so that's not the same as, that can't go on forever. It either gets better or it gets worse. But if you can have Mesiras Nefesh a whole year, that means that your husband's faults is your life, and it can go on forever. I mean, you can go on forever. You're not afraid of life, even if life means living with this. I'm not talking about misbehavior, which you shouldn't allow, but just character, you know. You have a question? Looks like you wrote a question. So the Eishes Chayil, if you look at it from a Hasidic perspective, is a commitment to the kavanah, that everything that happens is for a reason. Every day, every hour has its purpose. There's something right that can be done at any moment, at every moment. And to thrive on that is greater than the gibber. So there's Eishes Chayil and there's Gibber Chayil. Obviously the Eishes Chayil is feminine and the Gibber is masculine. In our generation, the kind of Mesiras Nefesh that is being called for is not the Gibber, but the other kind of Mesiras Nefesh. The Mesiras Nefesh of never losing the purpose, the direction, to stay the course and not fall away. When people marveled that after Gimel Tammuz, everybody was sure that Chabad would fall apart, Shluchim would go home to their families, they would quit. And it didn't happen. And they don't understand why. Doesn't make sense. And the best explanation is, the Shluchim did not go out to be the Gibber Chayil, they went out to be the Eishes Chayil. And so Gimel Tammuz had no effect, and maybe the opposite. After Gimel Tammuz, Shlichus blossomed. More Shluchim, greater successes, bigger projects, global events. Of course, technology helped, but there was somebody there to take advantage of the technology. So this Hakel year, again, is one of these amazing, where the Rebbe makes such a big tumult about seemingly nothing. What's Hakel? Get together and do what? Well, get together. And do what? What's the emergency? What's going on? Nothing. Get together. It's not heroic, but it's so consistent. So when we get this feeling that we need to do something dramatic, it's getting boring. Same thing every day, again and again and again. Where's the drama? Where's the explosion? Where's the That's a fear of life. When people say life is boring, it could be that it's a fear. I don't find the energy or the inspiration to make every day live. to bring every day alive. It is a form of fear. So it's not just boredom. It's intimidating. Yesterday I was excited, I was inspired, it worked. Today again, I can't do this. I don't have that kind of energy. There are certain people who by nature are very high energy. If nothing at all was happening, they would be hysterically happy. They're just like that. We call them crazy. They're the ecstatics. They're always ecstatic. About what? About nothing. And we think, come on, that's crazy. But when we get ecstatic, it's because something special. But how do you find something special every day? The purpose of the brachas we make every morning is to start the day ecstatic. Not wildly ecstatic, not over the top, because that's not Eishes Chayil. Eishes Chayil means the enthusiasm that exists consistently in whatever life demands. So you know that famous story about the guy who sells his tefillin to buy the esrog, right? And then his wife ruins the esrog, so he gets up to dance. In some versions of the story, dances with his wife. You can pick whatever version you like. But what is the meaning behind it? When the Eibishter wants tefillin, I have tefillin. When it comes Yom Tiv, the Eibishter wants esrog, I sell my tefillin, buy an esrog. If b'hashgacha pratis I don't have an esrog either, so what does the Eibishter want now? V'samachta b'chagecha. Fine, let's dance. In other words, whatever the situation calls for is great. It's not secondary. I really love my tefillin, but on Yom Tov you don't put on tefillin, so okay, I'll get an esrog instead. No, the esrog was as exciting as the tefillin. And then when the esrog is gone, the dancing and being happy with Yom Tov was as exciting and as important as the esrog, which was as important as the tefillin. That's a perfect example of an Eishes Chayil. So that's not relinquishing the Mesiras Nefesh of giving up. Okay, whatever you want. I'd rather have my tefillin, but okay, if I can't have my tefillin, okay. So we'll have an esrog. Oh, I don't have an esrog, okay. That's a guy looking to be heroic. The Eishes Chayil, it's not relinquishing. It's enjoying, finding the excitement and the importance in whatever it is the Eibishter wants. So it's exactly the same as saying, I have my favorite mitzvah, this mitzvah I enjoy, other mitzvahs I don't, which, to some degree is inevitable. We are human. Purim is a little more enjoyable than Pesach for most women. Only because it lasts one day. Otherwise it could be pretty draining too. So, yeah, we have our favorites. But to say that some mitzvahs I do because they're important, some mitzvahs it's like, okay, fine, if I have to do it. That's not Eishes Chayil. So, what is why even use the term chayal when you're describing a woman? And I'm not sure that valor is really the right translation of... There's the expression lases choil. To do. That can't be valor. To do valiantly. Maybe glorious would be a closer translation. Life is amazing. Life is amazing. And if you see it consistently, life is glorious. That's the Eishes Chayil. There is no dimension of life there's no expression of life that isn't amazing. Well, maybe amazing would be a better word. Eishes Chayil miyimtza, an amazing woman, where do we find? Not that she is amazing, but that everything in life she finds amazing. And that's what's amazing about her. I mean, we know that this is true because just from experience, how many times did something happen which you thought was, ordinary, meaningless, boring, and it turned out to be either very important or very negative. There are no insignificant moments of life. And that was one of the unique personal themes of the Rebbe, which was not so emphasized in previous generations. The fact that the Rebbe wrote Hayom Yom. And Rabbi Hakel once explained, what does Hayom Yom mean? It's like an unfinished phrase, right? Hayom Yom Shabbos Kodesh. Hayom Yom Revi, right? So Hayom Yom ... It's a funny way to title a book. So Rabbi Hakel explained, Hayom Yom means today is a day. There's no day that isn't a day. There's no insignificant days. And that was the Rebbe's whole personality. The uniqueness of this Shabbos versus every other Shabbos. And if this Shabbos comes out on this parsha, it comes out on that parsha, or something happened near the Shabbos, before the Shabbos, after the Shabbos, it makes the Shabbos unique, it makes the day different, everything is, every day, it's 2 days before Shabbos, it's a week before Pesach, it's 3 weeks before Pesach, everything was significant. And when he talked about the significance, it was like, nothing compares to this. Right? Purim is the biggest Yom Tov on the Jewish calendar. Even Yom Kippur is only like Purim. That's on Purim. When it comes to Yom Kippur, there's nothing like Yom Kippur. How do we raise a minivan full of children? Like that expression? every Lubavitch family has a minivan full of children. How do you raise 4, 5, 6 children and make them all feel right? Whenever you're talking to or dealing with any one of them, for that moment, they are the most important person in the world. And whatever the event, whatever the project, whether you're disciplining or complimenting or training or whatever it is, that's the most important thing in your life. First of all, the children will listen if you have that attitude. They'll thrive on the attention, even if it's critical. But if it's critical with the feeling that this is the most important thing in the world, they pay attention. If you're criticizing or disciplining because you have to and you'd really rather do something else, then they have the same attitude. Okay, you finished. Can I go now? We both hate this, right? So let's get it over with quickly and let's go back to doing something we both enjoy. But if it's the most important thing in the world, then they treat it with a whole new respect.
You have to follow through on that. The other kids are watching. His thing is more important.
So again, the key is the consistency. There are no unimportant events. There are certainly not unimportant kids in your family. And if there are, don't tell them. Can you imagine? You know, I don't have time for this because you're not my most important kid. You're really hung up on the word. So there are two ways of understanding Yelchu Michayel Ulchoyel. You can go from one heroic act to another, and in between you're depressed. Or Yelchu Michayel Ulchoyel means there is no in between. The consistency. Everything is amazing. So whenever you go from one thing to another, it's from one amazing to another amazing. There's no down. Now obviously this is mi yimtza. Shlomo HaMelech is saying there aren't too many people like this. Otherwise, you don't need Shlomo HaMelech to marvel at it. But of course, he was talking on many layers, many levels. He was talking about the Yidden who in the relationship with the Eibishter, we are the Eishes Chayil. And Yidden, as a rule, have been consistent. When we were rich, when we were poor, when we were healthy, when we were sick, when we were in our own land and other people's lands, it didn't matter. It came to do a mitzvah. There was no downtime. I forget where I was a couple of weeks ago. But at this Chabad house, there was a woman in her 90s who told the story of how she survived being in the Holocaust, being on the death march. And she described herself as a survivor. And she's in, the famous Schindler's program, and she was interviewed, and there's a tape of her. She is a survivor. But after she finished telling her story, there were some people there who were not Lubavitchers, not Lubavitchers. And they sat there with their mouth open. They couldn't believe it. This girl never learned anything. She was never in a yeshiva. She was never in a Jewish environment. She was saved by Catholics who raised her. and tried to convince her about Christianity, and she never, from nothing, directly from the neshama. But she remembered her grandfather crying at Kol Nidre. When she was 9 years old, she spent one Yom Kippur with her grandfather. That's all she knew. And she got married, and she raised a family, and she succeeded, and she's a big macher. How do you describe such a person as a survivor? That's such an inappropriate title. She's a survivor? A guy who gets bitten by a shark and lives, that's a survivor. She's not a survivor. We really should never use that word. Jews are not survivors. We don't outlive. We outgrow. We outperform. We find excitement in life where nobody else could. So in the best of times and the worst of times, Shabbos is Shabbos, Yom Tov is Yom Tov, kosher is kosher, having children, a mikveh. There's no downtime. So Eishes Chayil describing Yidden is a great compliment, a true compliment. When it comes to individuals, both men and women, that's not so easy. For individuals, of course, there were times when we were down. The generation after the Holocaust, it was a downtime. The miracle of the tshuva that came after is a miracle, because the down was very real. A loss of emunah, a loss of trust, a loss of purpose, not seeing why we should be Jewish anymore, what's the point. Very, very low time. But miraculously, it was only one generation, which is superhuman. You would think once you go down, the next generation will just go down further. Once you stop being inspired, you broke the chain. Where is the next generation going to get their inspiration from? So that's why the Navi who says that in the end of days, which is of course today, children will inspire their parents, that's not just a prediction, that's a miracle. How do children raised uninspired find inspiration enough to inspire their parents? That's not how it works. Particularly with tradition. Tradition goes in one direction, from the older generation to the younger generation. And yet we're living the miracle. And we just take it for granted as if it's perfectly normal. It's not. It's absolutely amazing. So in one of the magazines, I think it was Campus magazine or the Her, on the cover story, there's a picture of the Rebbe, I think, giving Keshel Bracha, and the Rebbe is saying, every minute that you're on Shlichus is a Shlichus. If you're in the place of your Shlichus, then every minute that you're there is your Shlichus. Which means, even when you're not doing anything, but you're where you were sent to be, that's Shlichus. Which means there's no down. There's no in between. It's not like you're a shliach when you're doing a project, and then the project is over, so you go on hibernation, and then by the next project you're a shliach again. No. every moment that you're on shlichus, which means even when you're not doing any project, you're sitting home talking to your children over dinner, that's shlichus. And that we should apply to life in general, whether you're a shliach or not. Because life is a shlichus. So, this woman who said, I regret that I didn't raise my children. I was too busy, I was distracted, I didn't raise my children. Yeah, that's not true. You raised your children with neglect. But that's what you did. You raised them neglectfully. It's not that you didn't raise them. So every day that went by, you raised your children by not talking to them, by not listening to them, by not paying attention. So there's never a time when you're not mothering. You're always mothering. The question is, how much fun is it? So of course there are the high moments when it's fun, meaningful, rewarding, satisfying. And then there's the ordinary, boring, mundane. That's a cute little thing. I'm sitting in the kitchen in Minnesota, and the winters in Minnesota are just amazing. You want to take the kid out for whatever, school, and it's a 20-minute ritual. There are the mittens and the scarves and the leggings and the boots it's 20 minutes. If the kid is in a good mood. Getting the boots on is particularly difficult because if they're a little wet from yesterday, you can't get your shoe into it. So we came up with a brilliant plan. You put a plastic bag on the shoe and then it slides into the boot. Anyway, so one of my kids was sitting on the steps trying to get his boots on. And it wasn't going, and it was late for school, and he was getting frustrated. And he said, he must have been 7 or 8 years old, he said, I can't get these stupid boots on. I was just sitting in the kitchen minding my own business, and I said, I don't mind if the boots are stupid, as long as the person wearing them is not. Not a highlight in my career as a father. A few days later, my son's friends were over, and he said something about a stupid book or a stupid something object. And my son said, it's okay if the book is stupid, as long as the person reading it isn't. And I realized there is no insignificant sentence ever. You have no idea. If I was in the fathering mode, I probably would have said something else. I wasn't in the fathering mode. I was minding my own business and I just reacted to a statement. But there's no such thing. Everything you say is a fathering mode. Because to your child, you're always the father, even when you don't think so, or the mother. So there are no down moments. So Chayil el Choyil might not mean, as it usually is taken to mean, go from one achievement to a greater achievement, but rather be consistently amazing. Now, in today's world, we're exposed to so many really amazing things. Heroics. And only the heroics gets any attention or respect. So if you don't do anything unusual and amazing, you're a nobody. But that's because of the nature of the media. Nobody's going to write a cover story, headlines in a newspaper, that you sent your kids off to school this morning. Uh-huh. With their boots on. Yeah, stupid boots. But that's if you're running a newspaper and you want to sell copies, you have to find heroics and weird, unusual things. But that's not life. We're not running a newspaper.
So you're basically saying that you have to stay inspired to inspire others. That's the bottom line.
Yes. But staying inspired does not mean heroics or headlines in the newspaper. In fact, the headlines in the newspaper are not real inspiration, because they only last, the 15 minutes of fame? Everybody gets their 15 minutes? That's more like the Mesiras Nefesh of dying. You refuse to bow, and they killed you. That makes the headlines. But the consistent daily inspiration, that is life itself. In Chassidus, we're told that there are 10 characteristics of the neshama. Chabad, Chagas, Nehim. And then there are two general forces that influence the behavior of the 10. And that's represented by the yarmulke and the hat on top of the yarmulke. In other words, the 10 koiches are inside the body. What hovers above the head is two influences, two powers that motivate or control the 10 koiches. And that is will and pleasure. So if you were to ask, according to Chassidus, what is the highest function of the neshama? Pleasure. In fact, the 10 koiches are the product of nefesh, ruach, neshama. Chaya, yechida are the two forces that control the nefesh, ruach, neshama. So chaya and yechida are will and pleasure. So the yechida of the neshama is pleasure.
And then Hashem himself, it is the essence of Hashem.
But the experience is pleasure, which means the essence of life is pleasure. If that's what life is. Life means pleasure. If, God forbid, a person loses all sensation of pleasure, life stops. Not that you want pleasure in your life. They're not two separate things. There is no life without pleasure. So what does it mean that the neshama is alive? That it feels pleasure. Because being alive is pleasure. That's why when we do a mitzvah, when we do a favor to somebody, it has to be with pleasure. It has to be alive. If all the pleasure we feel is unholy and selfish, then life itself is ruined. Because pleasure is life and life is pleasure. Maybe that's why when the Torah wants to describe the Eibishter's life, so to speak, it says, Nisava HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Eibishter had a passion or a desire, a pleasure, from which he created the world. So pleasure creates everything. The Rebbe finds the statement, Tracht gut wird sein gut, which is a Chassidish concept. The Rebbe found it in a Gemara. The strange Gemara. The Gemara says that a person who's going away on a trip and he wants to know whether he'll be successful, what he should do is go into a dark room and look at his shadow. Obviously not a completely dark room. If the shadow has a shadow, then he can be confident that he will succeed. If the shadow doesn't have a shadow, there's no guarantee that he'll succeed. And this is reliable, this is true and correct and so on. Then the Gemara says, however, better not to do it. Don't do that. Why? Because if you go into the room and you don't see a shadow to the shadow, then you will think negatively and that'll ruin your mazel. So we see that thinking negatively produces negative results. So we can extrapolate from that if you think positive, you get positive results. So what is all this with the shadow, with the shadow of the shadow? And when we say mazel, good mazel, big mazel, strong mazel, we're talking about the parts of the neshama that are not inside the body. Chaya and Yechida. So mazel has two layers, Chaya and Yechida. If the Chaya is reaching you, that's good mazel. If the Chaya and the Yechida is reaching you, that's big mazel. So for example, on your birthday or on an anniversary, your mazel is strong. You can give brachas, you can succeed, you can make good hachlotas and they'll work because you have the energy of the Chaya and the Yechida. So the Gemara says, if you want to know whether you're in touch with your Yechida, take a look at the shadow. One shadow means Chaya, double shadow means Yechida. But what if you don't see the Yechida? So now you have mazel coming from Chaya, but you're thinking negative already because you didn't see the Yechida. So you're going to ruin the mazel of the Chaya, which you would have if you weren't thinking negative. So that's why the Gemara says, better don't do it. Because if you don't have Yechida, at least you have Chaya. But thinking negative will ruin even that. So the question here is, in today's world, we're such junkies for a high. We're always looking for a high because that's what makes headlines. So we're just being influenced by an artificial lifestyle. Headlines is good if you're selling newspapers. But it's not a way to live. Life is not made up of headlines. Remember typewriters? Have you ever heard of typewriters? there were people who used to, who would make a living with a typewriter. So years ago, a woman asked the Rebbe if she should become a typist. And the Rebbe's answer was, type. Don't become a typist. Make a living typing and do it well, but don't become a typist. These artificial descriptions of life and of people distracts us from the reality of life. In life, you type or Skype. We don't type anymore, now we Skype. So fine, but don't become a Skypist or a Skyper or a Skype. That's why careers, in the 20th century when people discovered careers, it ruined life. It destroyed families, it destroyed life. People weren't people anymore. They were careers. And it was mostly men. But after a while, the women found themselves alone. Their husband was married to a career, and they were a single mother family. So the women said, who needs this? I'm going to have a career too. And what's left for the kids?
Neglect.
So becoming a career, looking for a heroic activity to do something high, that is so artificial, it's so not real to life. You hear when a parent passes away, and you hear the children speak. Of course, some things are heroic. People are famous for something. But what do you hear most often? Most often. You were always there for me. Right? You were always there for me. That consistency, that's the Eishes Chayil. If it's not always, then it's painful. I can't imagine children sitting around talking about their parent who passed away and say, you know, there was one year when my mother was there at that time. Was she ever there for you? Oh yeah, twice. Never had that kind of. So when in a eulogy, when people say, I'll never forget the time. That's it. There was a time. Usually what you hear is, you were always there. And that's the biggest compliment and the biggest. And if you want to call that heroic, okay, fine. But it's the kind of Mesiras Nefesh that goes on all year, not a special occasion or event. So, going back to the moon, the light of the moon is the light by which you can see what isn't obvious. The significance, the importance, the excitement of everyday activity where it's not obvious, the ability to see that's moonlight. That's Rosh Chodesh. So there are times in the month when there's no help at all, what's not obvious is completely not obvious, and you're on your own to find the meaning. But then Rosh Chodesh comes, and a little bit of light starts to shine until the moon becomes full, and that's when you see fully the significance of things that are not obvious. Now that you got it, the moon can fade away again, and you don't lose it. And after you've been 2 weeks with fading light, then it starts again. So every month is like a reminder and a renewal of the ability to see what's amazing in everyday ordinary life. Men don't see this naturally. And part of what Hasidus did is to educate men through the Avodah of Chassidus and through the teachings of Chassidus, that even men should be able to see what isn't obvious. Make sense?
What prevents
Now-
men from seeing it this naturally? Like, I don't. What is it that?
Because
why make
men-
such a statement?
Men are products of the sun, not the moon. And this, in the sun, everything is obvious. That's why it says animals run around at night finding their food. The sun comes up, they go into hiding, and man comes out to work. A man thrives when the sun comes up. That's the masculine. But it's particularly relevant to Purim, of course, because the miracle of Purim was not obvious. The Eibishter's name is not prominent. And yet, the Megillah and the fast day are both called Esther. And the word Esther means hidden, concealed. So when people say, how come the Megillah is called Megillas Esther? Why would it be named after Esther? Mordechai is as much part of the miracle. In fact, he pushed her to become the heroine. So why isn't it at least Megillas Mordechai Esther, or Esther and Mordechai? So the simple explanation is hidden greatness, the non-apparent, the non-obvious greatness is feminine. The whole thing is feminine. So it's not who is the biggest hero of the story. What is the story? The story is the ability to see what isn't obvious, and that is Esther. It's feminine, and her name is Esther, which means concealed.
That year of Mesiras Nefesh of women, how do we explain that the women knew that they were sending their children to their death, essentially? It's one thing to be Mesiras Nefesh for yourself, but to decide that your children and children's children will not be able to survive. So where did that come from in the...
I'm not sure what the question is, but it is a much greater Mesiras Nefesh to see your child in danger than to put yourself in danger. It's like the Akedah. And that's why, Chassidus asks, or Chassidim ask, what's so special about the Akedah? We all do it. We all sacrifice our children. In Russia, If you didn't send your kid to communist school, or if you taught him a mitzvah, it was a sacrifice. It was Akedah. So what are you asking? Where did we get it from? Where does such a Mesiras Nefesh come from? Or? Mesiras Nefesh is irrational. There's no explanation. It's the neshama can only tolerate what is right. And you can't ask, why is the neshama the way it is? That's the way it is. Speaking about survivors, I met this guy, also in his 90s. And he tells a story. He was 17 years old in the concentration camp. And the guy in charge of the kitchen was killed. So the officer came into the barracks, and he said, I want a volunteer to take over the kitchen. Nobody wanted the job, because if a piece of bread was missing, they would kill you. They would blame you. So nobody wanted. He was 17, but big for his age, or strong for his age. And the guy looked at him and said, "You volunteering?" He said, "Yep." Because if he said no, he would die. He would kill him right there. So he got the job taking care of the kitchen. It turned out that that's how he survived, because he always had some access to some food. So he mentioned that what happened, every day in the camp, there were about 300 people in the infirmary, on an average. 10% would die every day. So they had like a little system of, they knew immediately who died, and the portion, the food that would go to that, otherwise go to that person, was immediately shared before it became official. So he could do people favors, and he could give them food, and he could take food himself. One day there's a knock on the door, and there's this rabbi who was a big Dayan, famous holy man. He knocks on his door, and he says, "I need you to do me a favor. Get me 2 breads, lechem mishnah." This poor kid had no idea what lechem mishnah meant. So the Rav explained to him that it's a mitzvah to have lechem mishnah. He said, it's not one of the 10 commandments. I never heard of this mitzvah, and you want me to risk my life for lechem mishnah? That doesn't make sense. So this Rav said to him, "I have a secret. I'm gonna trust you. I built a sukkah, and tomorrow is Sukkot." And he had no idea. "And I'm risking my life to have a sukkah, so at least I want to fulfill the mitzvah of eating in the sukkah. So I promise you won't get into, it won't harm you if you get me 2 pieces of bread so I can do the..." And the 17-year-old kid who never went to a yeshiva said, "If I'm going to risk my life to give you lechem mishnah, it's going to be on one condition. I'm joining you in the sukkah, and we're going to eat it together. Because I also, if I'm going to risk my life, I want to do the mitzvah at least." And so they did. They sat together in the sukkah in the concentration camp. Years later, he lives in Florida. He succeeded. He's a wealthy businessman. He gives a lot of tzedakah. He's a big macher in the community, which again, that's not a survivor. That's an amazing, he thrives, not survives, right? Anyway, so his shul would have different rabbis from Israel come and raise funds or whatever. One day this rabbi came from Israel to raise money for some yeshiva, and he starts telling the story that he was in a concentration camp and he managed to build a sukkah, and there was this young boy who was in charge of the kitchen who impressed him so much by saying, if I'm going to risk my life, I want to at least do the mitzvah too. So afterwards he went over to him and he said, that's me. So they had an incredible reunion, and it was... Mesiras Nefesh doesn't make sense. But it's so much a part of our history and part of our lives. Glorious. But, like, what has he done since? That's the question. The Rebbe often spoke about people who in Russia had great Mesiras Nefesh, then they came to America and nobody threatening me, I don't have to die. Okay, so life is boring. That's terrible. So the Mesiras Nefesh of America, like the Rebbe says in the Maimon, the Mesiras Nefesh when Golus is good, that's the real thing. That you have Mesiras Nefesh to make Mashiach come, even though life is pretty good. When you're desperate for Mashiach because of your problems, that's understandable. But why would we demand that we need Mashiach now when life is not terrible? That's Eishes Chayil.
Is that a miracle or does that make sense?
It makes no sense.
So what's expected of having beautiful Eishes Chayil makes no sense?
Makes no sense.
The consistency and the enjoyment and appreciation of everyday life makes no sense?
Makes no sense. Because it comes straight from the neshama. That's why this guy, who I knew in Minnesota, he was suicidal. Serious problems, depression. One day he says to me, I'm better now. He's in therapy. He says, I'm good. I'm all better now. I have a good reason to live. I said, you're still suicidal. You need a good reason to live? You're suicidal. Life doesn't make sense because it's bigger than that. So the enthusiasm for life should not make sense. Huh?
So the guy's a little healthier. Is he healthier?
Well, he's not about to kill himself, but that's not called life. If life needs a justification and an excuse, it's not good.
But how do you say that to kids? Kids want meaning. Kids want, they want reasons. They want to understand things. And, how do we make Mesiras Nefesh relevant? It was clear in the shtetl because this is what you did, but over here it's,
Imagine talking to a teenager who's into tattoos and drugs and whatever, and you say, well, what happened to you? You were once a frum boy. He says, yeah, I didn't find any meaning in that. You're looking for meaning? And the result is tattoos? He wasn't looking for meaning. Because it's obvious that meaning is not his best quality. He's looking for something bigger than meaning. And when he didn't find it, he settled for less than meaning. But that's always what happens. If you can't find something bigger than meaning, then you give up and you become less, not even meaning. So the healthy average person has a meaning. I'm going to become a doctor, become rich, I'll become famous. It's not the real thing. And that's why when they become rich and then they get depressed. So it's just a delay.
They're still in themselves and their dreams and their goals. They didn't transcend themselves.
They didn't transcend things to life itself. So they don't see life itself as a shlichus, as a meaning, as a... If I can be a doctor, then life makes sense. If I have a big house, life makes sense. But then life doesn't make sense. The house makes sense. And that's why people with the big house and the big bank accounts and they go to the therapist and they say life doesn't mean anything. Life doesn't make sense. That's true. Because you thought the house makes sense, not life. So how do we get kids excited about life? Not about something. And that's why when Yiddishkeit becomes a thing, they rebel. All you're interested in is that I should be frum. That's all you care about. And what's wrong with that? Well, frum is not life. That's a problem. It is life. And that message didn't come across. It's like, everybody has a good life, but I want you to be frum. Why do I have to be frum? I can have a life. You ever heard that from kids? I'm not going to be frum, I'm going to get a life. My life is more important. We didn't convey the message. Life means the meaningful pleasure of being alive. What is the meaningful pleasure of being alive? The reason for which you live, which is Ivdu es Hashem. So if the kids are getting the impression that life is wonderful and everybody has a life, but he has to be frum, this is a very bad message. So when children say, you don't really care about me, all you care about is frum. I mean, that's a serious accusation. But bigger than that, it's not you don't care about me, all you care about is frum. You don't care about life. You're not into living, you're just being frum. Because they don't see how mitzvahs and life are the same thing. And that's what the Balei Tshuva do see. That's what they discover. Ask any Balei Tshuva. They didn't become frum. They found life. Because mitzvahs, Yiddishkeit, is life. They found it, and we can't convince our kids.
Our Yiddishkeit is dead now.
Huh?
So now our Yiddishkeit is dead. You're saying we need to place a mason on our Yiddishkeit.
Well, for some kids, it feels that way.
But all the teenagers feel that way now. Almost all of them.
Yeah. So it's very sad when when you tell a teenager that he should daven or something, and he says, "What about my life?"
Aren't they looking for pleasure? They don't get the higher pleasure, so they're looking for the lower.
Everybody's looking for pleasure, because life is pleasure. The question is, which pleasure is the closest to life pleasure? Obviously, eating is a pleasure. It's not the closest thing to the pleasure of life. Some people actually get pleasure from fasting. Excuse me. Anyway, anything else? Because I think I have to go.
So just to sum it up, in our daily life, we're talking about how our children should enjoy Yiddishkeit. But in our daily life as mothers, enjoying the life of being a mother, if we're not feeling the pleasure, it's because it's starting to feel like hard things. Then why are we off track?
How do we get that?
You're waiting for global warming. You want the sunshine, not the moonlight. But the moonlight is more important.
So you're looking for excitement in your life. You're not looking for the pleasure of life.
For the more obvious or the more glaring pleasures.
The non-obvious pleasure is the pleasure of
Life.
life itself. And life itself is, we're here to serve the Eibishter. That's life. And that applies to our families, because I want you in my life. You don't want to serve the Eibishter alone, you want to do it with your family.
I remember listening to a guy in Williamsburg talking to a group of non-frum teenagers. And he described, different mitzvahs and frum. And these teenagers from Long Island said, so, do you ever do anything for fun? And he thought for a moment and he said, yeah, we can go bowling. That's allowed. And these teenagers just looked at each other and rolled their eyes like, pathetic. What should have been the answer?
This is fun. Yeah. I like fish pleasure.
Bowling is fun? If that's your answer, then these kids are having much more fun, because not only do they go bowling, they also... So you've basically ruined your whole presentation of... You basically said life is no fun. Bowling is fun. I remember in camp we had counselors, Bachrim, from a very famous Frum yeshiva. So they were the older Bachrim and they were the younger Bachrim. And at night, the counselors went bowling. But the older Bachrim from this yeshiva were allowed to go bowling. The younger ones were not. You get this? For them, it was dangerous for them to. An older Bacher who was already established, he could go bowling. In other words, the reward for being an older Bacher is that you can go bowling. Very sad. Anyway, so yeah, if something
It's more like
is the
seeing-
definition.
You're saying that if we see the good and we can point it out, and our kids see that we're bringing out and we're noticing the good in the everyday things. That's what.
And you don't have to say anything. This is all moonlight. It happens without notice. It happens, without fanfare. It's life. It's life.
I give an example, like when a mother has a baby, and then she gets a gift of a piece of jewelry as a present for having the baby. As if like...
To make up for it.
To make up for... Like the bowling for the older Bachram, you learned all day, you get the prize of... You worked so hard, you had a baby, you get the prize of the jewelry. When... What's the mother's greatest prize?
It's a good muscle.
So you're saying that if our children see that we're truly alive, living from that alive place, they're going to sit up and take notice and wonder what it, like whoever's about Tshuva saw that there were people who were very alive and they thought, well, I don't know what they're doing, but there's something to look at there. So that's what our children would do if they see that.
Or they won't even notice. But they will be alive. And then you'll ask them, so how much did your mother contribute to your... Nothing. The Rebbe once asked this very secular guy, who was very successful as a writer, so the Rebbe said, to what do you contribute your success? And he said, well, I went to good schools, I work hard at my craft. And the Rebbe said, and your parents? He said, well, I guess, yeah, I mean, they must have had some influence on my, and the Rebbe said, just because you don't see it doesn't mean you're not obligated to thank them. And he realized what the Rebbe was telling him about the Eibishter. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean that you don't have to say thank you. But it's nice that you don't see it, because it's so natural and it's so... So what's the Eishes Chayil? The fact that Shlomo HaMelech noticed the Eishes Chayil, because there's nothing to notice. That shows that even he saw the moonlight. He made a big deal about nothing. And that's why some Chabad houses stopped translating Eishes Chayil. Because they used to say, this is a praise to the wife, and then they read it, and it's like, she gets up in the middle of the night and she weaves, what the heck? This is a praise? She's a slave. Feminists don't like it. So they stopped saying, this is to wives. And they don't give out those booklets that have English translation. But the truth is that that's the beauty of it. It's like Shlomo HaMelech saying, look at this. She didn't do anything unusual.
And she's happy.
Look at this. But that's...
Wasn't that like the Kohanim and the Kohen Gadol? What did he do?
The Kohen Gadol?
Kohen Gadol, the Kohanim, what was their work in the Beis HaMikdash? They took things in, they were saying that he went here, and then he went here, and then he put this there, and then he put that there, and then he put there, and then he put there, he went out there, and he...
It's a miserable job.
Not big, but I'm just saying.
Butchering and...
A lot of going and coming and...
Yeah.
putting and-
Yeah, nothing heroic.
Nothing.
Yeah. You bring this slice of meat to the altar and you fry it up and you...
So maybe that's the true intent of feminine leadership in the world, that women should be able to inspire men with that approach.
Yep. So having Mesiras Nefesh a whole year, that's more of a feminine quality. Because masculine is constant change. Time is masculine. Space is feminine. If you have Mesiras Nefesh a whole year, that's not an event. It stops being an event if it can last a whole year. It becomes a condition, which is like space, not like time. Time is constantly changing. But if you can be consistent a whole year, it's not time. That's feminine. We should have great success at little things, at being consistent, at being on duty. That's all. Like a famous expression that a soldier, even while he sleeps, he's a soldier. Doesn't have to be doing heroics to be a soldier. Even when you're sleeping, you're a soldier. Why? Because you're on duty. At any moment, any time, if something needs to be done, you're there. So even when you're sleeping, you're there. And that's why mothers should never say to their children, it's my time now. I'm not a mother now. I'll be a mother 23 hours a day, but give me 1 hour for myself. Huh?
You need that.
You need what?
You need
Touching on
time
a
to be a
sore spot.
person. Yes, you're a person as a mother, and that's who you are, and that's your essence, and yada yada, the whole spiel. But I lose my mind if I was with them 24 hours a day. That's why they go to sleep at 7 o'clock, but sometimes we need them to go to sleep at 6 o'clock also.
And when they're asleep, you're not their mother?
You're still their mother, but they're sleeping. So that's your time.
Right.
You need that.
You're their,
Sometimes you need it when they're awake at 12 o'clock in the afternoon.
You're-
Mommy's resting, go out and close the door. That's
you're their mother when they're sleeping, and you're their mother when you're sleeping.
exactly.
So there's never a time when I'm not your mother right now. There's a time when I'm sleeping right now.
So you're saying just don't tell them you need me time, but you can take the time. You have to take the time. You need
No,
the
it's
time.
an attitude. It's not just what you say. Are you quitting on motherhood for a while? Of course not.
I'm taking a break so I can be your mom.
Because if I'm with you that hour, I'm not going to be a good mother. It'll be worse than being with you that hour. In that hour of time when I need that time, if I'm with my children, it's worse than telling them. I mean, I don't use that phrase. I don't say.
So what you're actually saying is that the only reason you're going to sleep is so that you could be a good mother.
That's the only reason we do everything. Everything revolves around that.
Bingo.